Okay, welcome all to this Urbanism lunch hour. It's a young urbanist event. I'm Olga Gaidani, Programs Coordinator for the Academy of Urbanism, and Kevin Roeton, who is a young urbanist at Midlands Leeds. He will be chairing the session today. Our session is about the importance of youth and past identity in shaping future urbanism. Some housekeeping rules is that please note that the session is going to be recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your camera. And if you want to join the discussion, please use the chat box to comment and ask your questions. You have, as I can see, you have all add your full name, but if you wish to change that and have your full name so to be able to recognize you, it will be a great help for us. And if you want to engage online for the discussion, please use the hashtag #UrbanismLunchHour.
Thank you, Olga, and welcome to this Young Urbanist Seminar Lunch Hour, hosted by the Midlands region. It's great to see over 20 people have joined this event, especially when it's a lovely day and it's holiday season. My name's Kevin Roeton. I'm the Academy event lead for the Midlands. I became a young urbanist after attending the annual conference last year in Eindhoven, which really inspired me to take a more leading role with the Academy. Like many of you, I am fascinated about collaboration between engineers, artists, historians, architects, developers and planners in the pursuit of creating beautiful places. We must take a cross-disciplinary, holistic approach that brings along communities if we are to achieve this. So the subject of today's talk is to unveil the importance of youth, both in the past, present and future. Birmingham has the youngest population of any major city in Europe, with nearly 40% of residents being under the age of 25. Therefore, there is no better starting place to centre discussions around young adults' experiences of the built environment and expectations in the city of Brum. I am very pleased to introduce first our very first speaker, a work colleague of mine at WSP, Nick Corbett, who is a chartered town planner specialising in heritage and placemaking. Nick is going to give a talk about two of his local heritage heroes who achieved a lot when they were young and certainly have left enduring legacies. So without further ado, I'll let Nick unveil it all in his presentation. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Kevin, and it's great to be with you all. So if we could go to my presentation.
Yeah.
Is it possible to get is the first slide available? Great. Okay, thank you. So the government's white paper published last week proposes a new Act of Parliament for a new planning system. And there's been a lot of discussion about building beautiful, as Kevin says, and the use of design codes. And I want to consider how the design of the built environment, especially when linked to an understanding of our past, can give people a better hope for the future. And I'm going to explore, if you go to the next slide, please, how the architect A.W.N. Pugin developed a Gothic revival design code, and then how 80 years later, this helped to inspire an orphaned boy, J.R.R. Tolkien, who went on to write The Lord of the Rings. So who was this architect and designer, Pugin? Well, Pugin only lived to be 40, but in his short life, he crammed in 100 years worth of work. And crucially, he demonstrated how authentic design, craftsmanship, and beauty could be applied to mass production. And I think that's an important lesson for today's mass house builders. Pugin was born in 1812 in London, where his father was a cabinet maker and ran a drawing school. At 18, if you go to the next slide, please, Pugin was running his own furniture making business, and he would also travel to France to collect medieval Christian artifacts from old churches that he could pick up very cheaply after the French Revolution. Next slide, please. He would travel also widely across the UK, visiting Gothic cathedrals and almshouses, such as these at Wells. And he would also travel up to Birmingham and Warwickshire, where some of his best clients lived. And he would design furniture for them and also buildings and everything that goes into buildings. He was really ushering in a new era of total design. When he was just 24, tragedy struck when his young wife, and both of his parents all died from illness, and he was left alone in the world with a baby daughter to look after. And it was out of his struggles at this time that he committed himself to being a Gothic revival architect. That year, when he was still 24, he published a book called Contrasts, which contrasted Gothic design, which he loved, with classical design, which he loathed, saying it was pagan. Next slide, please. His book discussed ideas about authenticity in construction, including expressing the structure of a building in an honest way, how form should follow function, and how the intrinsic qualities of local natural materials could add beauty. This is a convent he designed in Lascelles in Birmingham, and the vibrant red brick just really adds something to the building. And his approach of expressing the structure of a building has influenced many contemporary architects, including Richard Rogers. Pugin became a professor at the age of just 25, and I'll explain how this came about. It was a sunny day back in March 1837. Pugin was 25, and he was travelling up to Birmingham from London on the brand new railway, the HS2 of its day. And he expected to arrive at Curzon Street station, but the railway hadn't actually been completed on time, and it was a coach replacement service that brought him into New Street. Next slide, please. Now, walking along New Street, he saw King Edward's School under construction. This is the Gothic building that he had designed with the architect Charles Barry. The school was a Gothic masterpiece, and when it was finished, many people said it was Birmingham's best building. Next slide, please. But there wasn't much time for Pugin to wait to see how progress was getting on with King Edward's School, because he was on his way to a job interview in the north of Birmingham at Oscott College, which is shown here. It's a seminary in the north of Birmingham where priests are trained. And Pugin's interview was to design the interior of the chapel at the seminary and to design 2 new gatehouses. Next slide, please. The chapel and the gatehouses all survive. I actually grew up opposite one of these gatehouses. And the interview that Pugin attended was life-changing for him. Not only did he get the commission to design the gatehouses and the interior of the chapel, but they invited him to stay as their resident professor of ecclesiastical antiquities, a role created uniquely for him. Pugin accepted, and he lived at Oscott in Birmingham on and off for a year. But to help train his students in the seminary about medieval arts and crafts, Pugin created a museum at Oscott, and included in it all those artifacts that he'd brought over from France. The museum is still there. Next slide, please. We got Heritage Lottery funding for a project that enabled local school kids to explore the museum and record their findings. It was also at Oscott that Pugin met the Birmingham manufacturer, John Hardman. And Pugin convinced Hardman to turn his Birmingham manufactory over from the production of buttons to the production of stained glass windows, metalwork, and many other features that he needed for his Gothic revival buildings. And whilst at Oscott, Pugin helped the architect Charles Barry, with whom he designed King Edward's School, to win the competition to design a new Palace of Westminster, the Houses of Parliament. And the fact that the building would be Gothic rather than classical was a major victory for Pugin. Later on, virtually all of the interior fittings for the Palace of Westminster would be made by Hardman to Pugin's designs in Birmingham's Jewellery Quarter. Next slide, please. It was also at Oscott that Pugin met Lord Shrewsbury of Alton Towers, who lived here. And he was the highest ranking earl in the land, and he would become Pugin's great benefactor. Now, at this time in the 1830s, the railways were opening up England, and the country was rapidly becoming urbanised. And people travelling by train could look out of the windows and see the backsides of industrial towns with their harrowing scenes of squalor and the looming edifice of the much-feared workhouse. And many people were increasingly concerned that England's countryside, the historic towns, and the people were being ravaged by industrialisation. In response to this, the kind of national mood, there was a surge of interest in nostalgic historic novels set in medieval times when there was chivalry, beauty, craftsmanship, and Gothic buildings. It was at this time that Pugin implemented his Gothic design philosophy to build an alternative to the dreaded workhouse. And Lord Shrewsbury paid for it, and it was built in the countryside just outside of Alton Towers. Instead of families being split up as they were in the dreaded workhouses, they remained together in Pugin's Gothic almshouses and were provided with gardens so they could grow their own food, and their children were taught in a little schoolhouse. So it was really a model community. Lord Shrewsbury, next slide please. Lord Shrewsbury also paid for Pugin to build St. Chad's Cathedral in Birmingham, which was the first English cathedral since Sir Christopher Wren's St. Paul's. Next slide please. Pugin also built a fine bishop's palace next to the cathedral in Birmingham. In the 1960s, the cathedral narrowly escaped demolition to make way for Birmingham's Inner Ring Road, but unfortunately the bishop's palace wasn't so lucky and it was demolished by the city's highway engineer Manzoni to make way for the Inner Ring Road. Next slide, please. History almost forgot Pugin, and he is still not really properly appreciated. And it's the story behind the Palace of Westminster that explains his rise and fall. He worked day and night for Charles Barry on the Palace of Westminster and did over 10,000 drawings for this building. He was the architect of much of it. He designed Big Ben and did all of the palace's interiors. As a consequence of his overwork, he frequently lost his eyesight, and adding to his health problems, his doctors were prescribing him with mercury, a poison. Charles Barry took the glory for the Palace of Westminster and the fees, and Pugin wasn't even invited to the opening ceremony. So why was this? Next slide, please. Well, Pugin was not an establishment figure. He was a Catholic convert. He married 3 times, had 8 children, became bankrupt, spent time in a debtor's prison. And because of overwork and the mercury that he was being prescribed, he ended up in Bedlam, the lunatic asylum. Pugin's 3rd wife, Jane, was devoted to him, and she actually rescued him from Bedlam. But you need to read the Palace of Pugin to see how she did that. Next slide, please. So now to Tolkien. You can see him in this photograph on the back row, on the right-hand side, so top right corner. It was 70 years after Pugin built King Edward's School in Birmingham that Tolkien was studying there as a young orphan. And the impact of Tolkien on contemporary world is, of course, considerable. His book, The Lord of the Rings, is one of the most loved and best-selling books of all time. As well as being a writer, Tolkien was an artist and he became an Oxford scholar. Both of Tolkien's parents were from Birmingham, and he grew up in the city, but he was actually born in South Africa in 1892. When Tolkien was only 4, his father tragically died, and his mother had to return to Birmingham from South Africa with her 2 boys. Next slide, please. Tolkien spent his boyhood in Birmingham, and he loved walking in the Lickey Hills, the Clent Hills, the Malverns and White Forest, and he was always intrigued by the distant, brooding Welsh mountains. His mother taught him to recognise the wild plants in Moseley Bog, a wooded area in South Birmingham that's dotted with Bronze Age mounds. And Moseley Bog is next to Sarehole Mill, shown in this photograph, which also fascinated Tolkien. Moseley Bog actually appears in Lord of the Rings as the Old Forest, and Farmer Maggot was based on a local farmer who regularly chased Tolkien and his brother off the fields next to Sarehole Mill. When Tolkien was 12, the next slide, please. When Tolkien was 12, tragedy struck again when his mother died, and he and his brother were orphaned, and they were sent to the parish priest, who became their guardian. At this time, it was the Gothic splendour of King Edward's School that inspired Tolkien and encouraged him to think about medieval England, chivalry and romantic adventure. I guess it was a form of escapism in his troubled situation. Next slide, please. And Tolkien was also inspired by the Gothic splendour of Lichfield Cathedral, and this was actually the last place where he met up with his best friends before they departed for the First World War, and they wouldn't all return. A few years before this, when Tolkien was 16, he fell in love with Edith Bratt, who was 3 years older than him, but his guardian forbade the couple from seeing each other until Tolkien was 21. Next slide, please. I was in a church recently in Warwick. It was designed by Pugin's son. And the priest there told me that Tolkien and Edith Bratt were married in that very church, and he showed me their marriage certificate. I was intrigued to see Tolkien's signature on this. You can see it at the bottom of the 3 dots. And I don't think it was an accident that Tolkien got married in a Pugin church. Next slide, please. Warwick
2 minutes, Nick.
Okay, Warwick is full of Gothic buildings that inspired Tolkien. and the places in the Lord of the Rings. So Minas Tirith, Middle-earth, really Birmingham and Warwick and other bits of the West Midlands. Tolkien achieved a lot at an early age. He was a professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford when he was just 33, and that's where he befriended C.S. Lewis, author of Chronicles of Narnia. Tolkien would have been very saddened when they demolished the Gothic masterpiece of King Edward's School in the 1950s, and a modern replacement was built in Edgbaston. But some of the interior fittings by Pugin were salvaged and they went into the new school. Next slide, please. Including timber panelling and the headmaster's throne. The headmaster really did have a throne designed by Pugin, and Pugin would go on to design the sovereign's throne in the Palace of Westminster, but the throne for the headmaster of King Edward's came first. And Tolkien was really concerned about Birmingham's heritage. He personally invested in saving Sayre Hall Mill when it was threatened with demolition, and it remains open to the public today. So to conclude, Tolkien and Pugin both took inspiration from the landscapes and heritage of the Midlands, and the region helped them to develop their vision for a better world. They took inspiration from Gothic design to satisfy a national longing for a more virtuous society. Some people might say that Gothic design is a form of romantic escapism, but it's the deeper meaning behind Gothic design that resonated with Tolkien and Pugin during times of great social upheaval. And it's the links between Gothic design and beauty, craftsmanship, authenticity of design, celebrating the intrinsic qualities of natural materials, and a strong belief in social justice that inspired them. And isn't that relevant for design codes today? Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Interesting talk. About past legacies and the professional commitment behind creating ornate buildings, I think you showed an image of a terrace street with ornate chimneys in Wells. My question to you is, how can we ensure modern house builders and their employees adopt the ethos that sits behind Gothic architecture, i.e. attention to detail, high quality design, craftsmanship, and the use of local materials?
Well, I think design codes have got a key role to play, but they need to be produced very carefully, and they need to serve as a kind of performance criteria against which development proposals can be assessed. But I think they also need to go a bit deeper. And if we're going to create places with an authentic sense of place, and sometimes talk about spirit of place, then there needs to be a kind of philosophy behind the design codes and a deeper thinking. And hopefully the Gothic revival, my presentation shows that there was a bit of deeper thinking behind that about authenticity and the use of local or natural materials. And but I think a crucial thing will be enforcement and how design codes are actually implemented. And I think that developers should be asked to present their proposals to show how they will implement the objectives of a design code when a design code is accepted for an area. And then we also need to think about, well, who signs off a development scheme and make sure that it is performing against an agreed design code. Will that be the local planning authority? Will it be local community? Will it be a design review panel? Will it be young urbanists, or will it be a mix of all of those?
For me, it goes beyond planning in terms of actually construction training, city and guilds, apprenticeships as well, to create that real skill in craftsmanship. So yeah, interesting. A lot to debate and discuss. I don't think there's anyone who's put any questions forward yet, but we'll move on to Simeon, who is our next speaker, who's a doctoral researcher in urban planning at Birmingham City University, currently researching young citizens' engagement in the planning of future cities. He is part of the youth steering committee of the youth organisation Beat Freaks in Birmingham. Simeon has received funding from the Young Urbanists Small Grant Scheme for his project on Brum's Youth City. He will discuss his findings on the current views of young adults living in Birmingham to residential development and the urban realm, before sharing his thoughts on the future. So over to you, Simeon.
Hi, thank you, Kevin. Just making sure screen showing all right.
You have
you can
to
see my present. Do I have to do the?
Place it.
Yeah, there we go. This is much better.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Right. Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Simeon Shtebunaev. I'm a PhD student in Birmingham City University. My PhD is focusing on teenagers and their perceptions in the urban environment, and specifically in the visioning of smart cities and sort of future cities. But this project was something different, which I applied for the small grants. And I was specifically looking at how young adults, so that's 18 to 29, and I'm using the definition of the Commonwealth, which kind of defines young adults as 18 to 29 years of age. And what is the experience in Birmingham? And I think there is this sort of understanding that Birmingham is one of the youngest cities in Europe, which is not unfounded. However, there is very little to kind of demonstrate what young people in Birmingham actually want from the city, and how they can influence the city. So originally the project was supposed to deal with face-to-face interviews on streets around certain developments that were happening around Birmingham, but we all know why this didn't happen. So it changed to kind of mean a different thing. I was looking at specifically at how young adults' perception of housing in the city might be changed by the lockdown. So everything went online, and it was a survey, which was the primary methodology of how I conducted the research. I was also trying to find out, is the pandemic actually changing how young, the way young adults live in the city? And finally, kind of continuing with that same thread of my PhD was about how can young adults, young people have actual influence in the post-pandemic urban planning, or just generally in urban planning. So, why Birmingham? There is a lot of development which is happening and will continue to happen even after the pandemic sort of abated. There are a lot of big projects such as HS2, Birmingham 2022, which are kind of bringing investment to the city, but there's also a lot of projects around the West Midlands, which are kind of coalescing around in Birmingham and bringing further opportunities and further investment. I mean, you can just see in the city, there's plenty of cranes at the moment. Why young adults? Birmingham is an outlier in the sense that the population between 18 and 29 years of age is actually disproportionately large in the city compared to sort of what England age pyramid looks like, and maybe other major cities. There is a tail off, so there is a underlying question of why do young people come to the city, and then why do they kind of disappear afterwards, or why maybe they move out somewhere else. But as Kevin was saying earlier, he said 40%. I thought it was around 20, but in 2025. But yeah, anyway, it depends, I think, how you define Birmingham. There is also a question of housing and sort of ownership and tenure. The average age of first-time buyers at the moment is 31 to 33 years of age across the UK. No, I think England and Wales, actually, this is the National Housing Survey in England and Wales. And you can see that this is sort of moving up and up and up with every year that passes by. So in terms of the survey itself, it was conducted between the 2nd and the 20th of May. So this was sort of at the maybe height of lockdown, or kind of when restrictions started to be lifted for whatever reasons. The relaxation started on the 13th of May. So the research was taken between the 2nd and the 20th of May. So this was kind of enough time for people who have lived through the period to have experience of the accommodation and maybe have an intimate understanding of, is this working for me? Is it not working for me? What are the major issues? So who responded? As you can see on the top right, I think, on your screen, or top left, there was a lot of people that kind of got exposed to the survey, but ultimately 52 people replied, out of which 49 fitted the criteria. You can see that the age range is significantly skewed towards the higher age band, so 25 and plus, which might kind of coalesce with my own personal age and my own personal sort of social media contacts. And again, female and male, a bit more females, but that is kind of similar to what the Birmingham split is at that age range. Again, how they define Birmingham, the respondents, it was a sort of a self attribute. So people might have said, I live in Birmingham, even though they might have lived in Solihull or somewhere else. So broadly, I'm just put the map here on Greater Birmingham. So bear in mind that the city boundaries are not necessarily defined. So again, looking at tenure and sort of what the living situation of the people who responded are, majority of them live with their partner, and some of them lived alone, alone or with a family. So that kind of could be expected that at this point in time, you probably are in a more kind of rented situation, or living with other people. So in terms of housing conditions, so one of the major issues that I was trying to find out was what's the experience of their housing accommodation. You can see here, to my surprise, the majority of people said that yes, the accommodation is suitable. Very few people actually said that it isn't suitable, or you can see nobody actually said that it was outright unsuitable. However, I do think that this has something to do with the average age at which people become parents in England specifically. I think for women it's around 29, 30, and for men is around 30, 33. Which is the average when they actually have kids. And I can imagine having kids would have complicated that situation a lot more. So that might be explained with sort of the flexibility of young people. When asked about sort of main challenges which were faced when people were staying at home, you can see here there were a lot of options given, but mainly they were grouped in 5 sort of main issues. Maintaining physical and mental health was the top priority, or the top sort of challenge that people faced, even though a lot of them indicated that the accommodation was suitable for them to maintain similar quality of life. I think on the second place was the ability to work from home. I think that is kind of a thread that's emerging, and there was a lot of sort of discussion in the qualitative answers about the employer maybe providing some of the desk equipment, Wi-Fi, things that kind of you have to have if you work from home. Lack of suitable external space came up as a challenge only on third place, or kind of relatively lower than I would have expected. And then there was a lot of talk about suitable indoor conditions in terms of the housing in which people were self-isolating. And obviously social relationships sort of, would have been an issue if you're spending a lot of time with someone else. I think what was interesting and might have changed now is the finance. A lot of people didn't necessarily reported issues with, struggling to pay their accommodation, or kind of having lost job or something like that. But I think this is probably to do with the fact that the furlough scheme was up and going. I think if this survey is to be done maybe now, or even in October, or potentially in a second lockdown, that would probably climb the challenge a lot quicker. So in terms of actually testing what people's perceptions are about the developments in Birmingham, I picked 3 developments which planning applications were put afterwards of after the lockdown started, so post 23rd of March. So the 3 ones that I picked were the 51 Northbourne Street and 10 Mary Street in the Drury Quarter, Essex Street Tower, which is down by the Ring Road, and Middle Green Charles Street, which is on a vacant site nearby the Drury Quarter again, which has been vacant for quite a while. So people were asked basically to say what they think about a plan of the development, and also the externals. So the images that you're seeing now are the images that people saw in the survey. And obviously the planning application was linked, so people could have actually gone and looked if they wanted to. So this one was the development that kind of received the most favorable views, and maybe that goes back to sort of Nick's talk about heritage, but it kind of, people felt that it was inoffensive. I mean, you can see it was, archaic, old school, in keeping. So I guess that kind of perception doesn't necessarily change with age. The Essex Street development was the one that kind of polarized people the most. There were a few descriptions of being a shiny turd, but I think the main issue was about the context in which it was situated, and a lot of people sort of extending. The question was about one word or several words description. People were writing sentences about the fact that it is not contextually appropriate according to what they see, which is surprising because later down this was the plan that actually people preferred the most. And then again in the Drury Quarter, the development here was felt to be maybe the most sort of in the middle between the two, but the most sort of at a progressive sort of what's at offer at the moment. It could be anywhere. It's a London development, but people felt that it was sleek. It was, just a another sort of necessary large development. Overall, all development in terms of externals kind of received not very favorable views. They were qualified as uninspiring eyesores and kind of tall but necessary, or kind of crude but necessary. In terms of actually then asking about the plans, I showed them the three plans from the three developments, similar square meterage, kind of similar sort of arrangement. And then the question was about which one would you self-isolate in the future if you had a chance to. Obviously, that would have depended on people's personal sort of experience. If do they live alone or did they live with someone else? The majority of people prefer flat B, and I think the reason for that was because it had two bathrooms. Two bedrooms were quite separate, and there was a lot of sort of views and light according to the, sort of the curve that people thought that might provide them with a better outlook. A second place was actually staying in their current accommodation, and main reasons was because most people in that category lived in houses. So I asked the follow-up question of why did you choose what you choose? And then again, access to external space was sort of given as a top priority. Next came Flat C, which is the Jewelry Quarter development, which is the low scale, the sort of heritage in keeping development. And this was mainly to do with the bedroom and the work from home. People thought that the bedrooms could accommodate a desk and could accommodate a sort of a better working environment. So when then asked about what would you change about the design of your current accommodation to actually make it more appropriate to stay home or stay home for longer, I think most people tended to say access to external space or space to be active in. And I think this is something that people might face bigger issues in Birmingham coming forward. I mean, most of the developments that have been put since lockdown, you can just go on Twitter and look at Greater Birmingham developments. Most of them do not have any access to external space. So that would be, I think, a question that would probably stay for longer.
2 minutes left, Simon.
2 minutes left. Oh my God. Okay, working from home.
Doing well.
Well, we're definitely going over. So I think the top three criteria in terms of then looking at what would people actually prefer to buy after lockdown, again, came to sort of suitable garden, size of accommodation, and condition of property. I was quite surprised about sort of storage and maybe like work from home adaptability, but people obviously were able to adapt with them. Right, so we have two more topics, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. In terms of the urban realm, you have to bear in mind people at this point in time were not leaving their house as much as they would at the moment. So this is sort of a breakdown of what people were actually doing, or at least the people who responded. What was interesting for me in that sense was to find out that actually of the people who were engaged in the planning process did not like Birmingham's urban environment as much as people who were not engaged in the planning process. Most of them found that Birmingham was, all right, not great, but it was all right, which maybe talks about the activism of people that actually having, different views to what the city is doing. In terms of top challenges, actually physical distancing, it was about the pavement size, other people, and what came up, I thought a bit surprising, but maybe justifiable at that point, having hindsight, was anxiety or social anxiety of actually going outside. In terms of then having a question of what would you like to see in Birmingham in the next 10 years, what for me came up as a bit of a surprise was the idea of empathy in the production of cities. So that kind of goes back to Nick's conversation, conserving heritage, and people talking about building with kindness and places of character, places of understanding. And that might have been something that would have changed people's perception post the pandemic and the sort of solidarity feeling. Other tropes that came up, obviously, with affordability of tenure, well-connected city. I mean, we all know Birmingham has issues with that. And then top was the green spaces and nature and wildness in the city. I think people are kind of feeling very strong about that. In terms of how urban planning and architecture would be important for the post-pandemic recovery of societies, I think most people felt it would be quite important. Again, surprisingly, most of the people that said not very much were people that actually practiced in the built environment, which for me was, maybe some sort of self-cynicism. Most people said yes in terms of how, the urban planning has to change, but how? The lessons were again echoing the same sort of ideas, and I can imagine a lot of it would have been done with the media and what people are actually seeing on screen, because for me, what was surprising in this sort of section was that people didn't necessarily mention sort of trodden paths of like technology in cities, 5G, electric cars, something like that. Most people were talking about human-centered cities, green spaces, affordability, good transport, active cities, so sort of that 15-minute city that Paris is looking at. And again, you know, for somebody who's researching sort of future city visions, for me it was quite interesting that maybe some of the smart city or sort of future city visions that, you know, have been battered around the internet or promoted by big developments do kind of tend to promote the same issue, the same sort of images of, you know, greenery, of active places, of walkability. However, there are hidden issues that maybe most respondents didn't necessarily touch upon, which was ownership and who actually has the say about what happens, you know, not necessarily just how it looks. And then finally, I was asking about what do you think are the main important drivers of change in Birmingham, thinking that probably pandemic is going to top all of it, but I don't think it was. I think people were actually keeping their eye on the ball, and climate and environment were the priority in the majority of the sort of the answers. I think sort of self-referentially, obviously young people came up as a top priority, but that could be understood as well as the fact that Birmingham does have that understanding of itself as being a young city. And then inequality, you know, I mean, we already saw post this survey, the Black Lives Matter already took hold, and there were big protests in the city. I think what was surprising for me as well was that, you know, thinking about health, you would have thought that maybe antibiotics or something, the next sort of big crisis that would potentially happen would come up higher, but it was only one person that sort of put it as a sort of driver change. And again, housing didn't necessarily come up as much as I would have expected. So the future for the research is basically I'm going to try and create some sort of policy briefs that to go to local politicians and look at, you know, we've already heard about what's the opportunity for engagement. So potentially, initially when I pitched the project, the idea was that there should be a youth design review panel, but Birmingham has sort of gotten rid of the design panel now, so that might be a different solution. So if you have any ideas, you know, get in touch. But this is a sort of the question I would like, you know, maybe to leave for the discussion, and is how can young people, and I'm now talking about both of the sort of the age ranges which I'm looking at 50 to 29, can have a say in post-pandemic urban planning. I think the white paper has actually thrown some big questions out, and specifically about digitalization, but as you can see from my survey, and as you can see from other sort of youth engagement experiences, just putting things online and putting things digital doesn't necessarily mean that you reach the people that you want to reach. So if we are being serious about creating local plans that truly engage the community, we'll probably have to do this with, you know, a lot more investment in a lot more different ways, regardless of the age range. But yeah, so this is it. So should we go to the discussion now? Should I stop sharing?
Thank you, Simeon. That was a great presentation, very relevant, and obviously puts into context the young population of Birmingham and how the young people view the city. We've had a lively debate on the chat box, something that was obviously we've discussed before, obviously design codes, and will they actually be implemented this time round? Historically, they have been obviously used. I remember using Building for Life previously, and that never carried forward most recently. So yeah, I think it's also linked as well to how we get young people involved. So to start with, I don't know if we can get Bart Sherm on the actual live, Olga.
Okay. Bart can unmute.
Hi, Bart. If you can elaborate on your question and response, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I read the planning white paper the weekend, and one of the big things it talks about is using digital means to get people more involved in the process. So moving away from ticking notices, lampposts, and actually using social media and stuff like that. And I think that's something that resonates with young people a lot more. So I was just wondering if you think it's going far enough to engage young people just using social media and digital means, or if there's other stuff that we should be talking about too. Like the idea of a panel, a design panel in Birmingham sounds great. So actually getting the same young people in a room to talk about these things too.
And Andrew Burrell, if we can get Andrew on the call, a bit more sceptical.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
it's really, oh, I'm told to start my video. It was the same question, but without the detail of the social media. And what I was really asking is, why should we feel that any form of design code, when it finally reaches the position of a series of rules, why would it work this time when frequently they haven't worked in the past? And it was generally an open question, more of a starter debate, which I realise it has done.
Nick, I don't know if you're in the best position to respond to that. You're on mute, Nick. Sorry.
I think it's a really good point, and I think that design codes have varied in sort of quality of delivery and the environments that they've created. Sometimes there's been great results when there's an enlightened landowner and developer, and so there's a really strong will to implement them. And in other instances, they've ended up being quite weak, because often they've just been implemented by being a condition on a planning approval. And then a developer in the future can apply to amend that planning condition. So I think the issue is the teeth of design codes and delivery and enforcement when delivery doesn't happen as it's supposed to happen. And I think there's going to have to be a national debate about that, about, you know, if people are going to be engaging with the production of design codes, then they're going to want to see results. And I think that the social media is a great way of sharing ideas. And it's great that the public are going to be more involved, or at least that's the intention. But I think it needs to be a co-production approach as well. So we're not just saying to the public, tell us, you know, how you want it to be. That it's got to be, I think, planners and architects, urban designers, engineers working with the public and explaining, you know, the process and how the built environment is produced. So then we get more of an informed response. And I think a design review panel is a great idea for Birmingham. And I think for young people to be part of that as well is a great way to influence the process and to learn as well. So I think it needs to be co-production with the experts, professionals, but engaging with the public. So the public are not just having design codes done to them, but they're actually you know, steering and directing the process as well. So I think it needs a team approach. I've also just been thinking about the quality environments that I can really think of, like the London estates and the Calthorpe estates in Birmingham, where there's very high quality environments. It's where they have a 50-year plan, or the developers, the landowners, have a long-term stake in the future of the place. And it's in their own interest then to make sure they have high quality development, because they have a long-term stake in the performance of the place. And so I think that might be something to think about as well. How do we make sure that developers have a longer term stake in the place that they're investing in? I don't know if that could be like a bond or something, but I think we need to think about that longer term commitment and a longer term plan, and like a 50-year plan that the Calthorpe estate in Birmingham has. They own, I think, 1,600 acres of land in Birmingham. And for 300 years, we've seen quality investment there. And so I think we do need to think about delivery and how we make sure that design codes deliver.
Thank you, Nick. Simon?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to Bart's point when he was talking about digital. I think, you know, that for me, that was one of the very positive things that come out of the white paper. I think where I might be concerned is that sometimes that might have been seen sort of putting things digital, creating a digital system might be seen as sort of an excuse of maybe not investing as much, because, you know, there is plenty of research out there that digital engagement actually faces the same issues as sort of in face-to-face or, you know, physical engagement, and specifically with groups that might have different issues, say older people, younger people, you know, people that might not find information easily or might not feel comfortable enough to actually get to that point where they can contribute, you know, with their opinions. You have to put extra effort in, even if everything is online. And I think where I would be wary about is that initial investment of actually creating the system in a way where it's actually accessible, not just sort of creating a system where it is online and, yeah, of course everybody can find it, but can you actually meaningfully engage? I think there is a risk there that you can further disenfranchise groups. And I think there's also a question there about when is the point of engagement. I think there is, obviously a much greater need to engage people in the beginning of creation of design codes or creation of local plans. But I think I was listening to Ewan Mills maybe 2 months ago when he was talking about actually having that data constantly being fed to a local plan. So it's not just about digitalizing the local plan once, but it's about actually then adjusting those policies as things change throughout the period of 20 or 25 years or however it covers.
Can we also try and get Pam Alexander on the call as well? She making a few good points in the chat box.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Well, I really wanted to ask how we can share best practice. We're so far ahead of where we were when CABE was first starting to make design codes something that we've shaped over the last 20 years. And they had the big advantage that they were mandatory. I'm distressed to hear Simeon say that there's any chance of Birmingham losing its design codes, but it's not going to have much choice about it. If the planning reform white paper becomes law, they will have to have some sort of design review panel. And I think, I believe that it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, obviously. I would also say that we've found at Commonplace, which some of you know I chair, that actually digital engagement brings in very different issues, not all the usual ones. We get 75% under 45, so we do reach young people, and we're able to see when we don't reach any particular category in a particular place. But I'd rather that we started talking about how we share the very best practice and make it an end-to-end process. If it's going to be mandatory for local plans, I'm really worried about what happens then if automatic outline planning leads people to believe that their inputs had very little value because they don't like what comes out at the other end. We have more experience in design panels at actually looking at applications. What we have no experience of anywhere in the planning system is real enforcement of the conditions. And that requires much greater resource than any planning department's got. So it seems to me this is an opportunity to take a really holistic view of what works, trying very hard not to be cynical, and trying to take all of the best practice that we have developed over 20 years and seeing how we can make it turn into an end-to-end system that works in terms of what's actually built as well as what we think about in master plans. And so I'd be very interested in anyone's thoughts about that.
I think the fact that there's primary legislation now going to be coming forward is a golden opportunity when it comes to enforcement. And so I hope they really grasp the nettle and make sure that design codes really do have weight and really have to be adhered to if they're adopted with public approval. And I think that if there is accountability, then the whole regime will change. Whereas at the moment, there isn't really a great incentive for developers perhaps to comply with design codes because they know that they can apply to have a planning condition amended, which might relate to the implementation of a design code. And I think that getting to grips with that is absolutely critical, and it's going to take primary legislation. So I think we've got a golden opportunity. We really all need to make sure that we respond to the white paper and try and influence government policy to make sure that design codes have clout.
I think if I could come back very briefly, the scary bit of the white paper is that I chair a planning committee for London Legacy Development Corporation. We make sure the conditions are applied to the final process unless we don't like the way it's gone and we get them to change it. But I don't see under the system that's set out in the white paper, and I'm on holiday, so apologies, I've only read half of it so far. I don't see how we're going to influence that at the local level. If we have national standards, how are we going to apply what's appropriate locally? And those of you who've spent more time studying it than I have might have the answers to that. I'm hoping so.
Well, the impression I get is that the NPPF is going to be more like a kind of technical specification that will be applied nationally, but then it's going to be up to localities to come up with the detail of really understanding the place and making sure that design codes are relevant to the locality. But it's going to require a lot of sort of investment of time and energy and finance at a local level if a design code is going to really be, fit for purpose. And I think a great deal of thought is going to have to be given to the production of the design codes. Who's going to take a lead, and who's going to be involved, and where the funding is going to come from. And then they need to be legally enforceable, so that people know that they're not wasting their time and that they really are going to be shaping their patch.
I would tend to agree with Nick in that. I mean, I think how the white paper sets up, there is a lot of sort of front loading on a lot of the things that have to be created, whether design codes or the sort of the reduced time for the local plans implementation. So I think unless they're people are prepared to actually fund that on the local level, national standards have a real danger of kind of being too kind of in specific for the local community, or yeah.
You can't have one size fits all, not across the whole of England.
No, but I think that the production of design codes should be fun as well, and it should appeal to young people and old people, and because when they're seeing drawings and visiting places, it becomes very real. Whereas the local plan process can feel very bureaucratic and legalistic and a bit frightening to get involved with. Whereas design codes potentially could be a much more accessible way of doing planning, I think.
I suppose my question about best practice was, if we still had CABE, they would be putting all of it together, telling us who's doing it really well, working out what doesn't work. There isn't anyone with that function at the moment, except possibly central government now, and the new chief planner, Joanna Averley, who herself is great news. So that may be a big step forward. And we still have Andy von Bradsky in there. But I'm a bit worried about the department doing it. I wonder how we can all do it. I think we've got a great design code at the Olympic Park, actually, which we only published last year. But I'm sure others have even better ones, and I'd like to know where they are.
Yeah, well, I think we've got, again, a golden opportunity with Joanna being the chief planner to raise this. And the white paper does talk about a new design code, an organisation that is going to be championing design codes. So
building beautifully, I hope.
Yeah, but in terms of organisation, that seems to be what they're talking about, is that there will be some national champion for design code, and that will need to filter down to the regions and at a local level. But of course, Joanna worked for CABE, so she kind of knows the landscape.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pamela. Just going to slightly change the conversation. Tom Benson has raised a few interesting questions as well. I'm interested to know if he's actually from Birmingham himself. So yeah, if we can get Tom on the online.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'm actually not from Birmingham. I'm actually from the small town of Burnley, but I'm actually in Boston in the US at the minute. But my question was more, because I actually moved from Burnley to London for my studies, and I stayed there for a little time as well. And I was wondering if the survey that you've done so far was solely just based on Birmingham residents. But from a young perspective, I see a lot of people growing up in these cities and towns in England and then actually making the move to London. So I actually think also asking these same people who moved from Birmingham to London, or even from Manchester to London or Leeds to London, could also have an interesting point of view of why they actually left London, and that could actually why they actually left Birmingham, and how that could improve as well, to actually open the scope up to the larger parts of the UK as a survey. I wonder if you thought about that.
I would love to do that. I mean, I think, the focus was only on Birmingham, and specifically, I think we actually talk about people do that in Birmingham. Birmingham is the reason it has such a big young population is because it's a job and university sort of attractor around the West Midlands and just wider beyond that. So it kind of has the same effect. But no, that survey was only focused on Birmingham because, well, time and sort of, actually getting everybody to respond. There is an organization which I'm part of, which is called Beat Freaks, and they are next week going to be launching a national youth trend survey. They're not necessarily looking at purely development, but they're looking at just generally what young people think. So that would be something to watch, because this is for the first time that they're launching it nationally across the UK. So it would be quite interesting to see they have a section there about built environment and what people want. In the past, what they've managed to do in Birmingham in the West Midlands is to create the youth combined authority. So there is a sort of a youth board in the combined authority that shadows the main board and kind of shifts, those, checks those decisions from a young person's perspective. And I think it's 20 or 25, 15 to 25-year-old people that sit on that board from across the West Midlands. So that'll be something interesting. But I think obviously there is the resource attached to actually, just doing it nationally.
Yeah, of course. But I wonder though, because if it's just, it's collecting data, right? And I wonder, if you opened up the survey to the whole of the UK and ask a few more questions, is it really time consuming just to get more results, right? I don't know. I'm just trying to way to quantify, is it actually?
I don't think it is. I think it's mainly how do you get access to the people actually, eligible to complete that survey. And also, again, the reason I was using a specific platform was ethics approval. So I think if it's about, scraping Twitter data, that's no problem. But then who do you ask what the questions and how do you verify that those people are actually, in that age range or not just bots or, just kind of replying because they want to reply. So I think there are, kind of questions there about the quality of the data. And I probably have the same questions about my own data anyway, even though, it was a sort of JICS approved survey platform that people had to be committed to get through. It wasn't just, replying on a Twitter poll.
Yeah.
Okay, we're actually running out of time, so I'd like to draw a close. Thank you to the two speakers, a very thought-provoking talk that obviously stimulated a lot of discussion and debate. So yeah, thank you for your time there. And also thank you to Olga, who obviously put us all together and advertised the event and obviously was the key behind organising the event and delivery. So yeah, thank you all again for dialing in, especially on this nice, warm, hot day. But no, it's been great. And I think that the key thing about the Academy of Urbanism is that it always, the discussions and the debates from the talks always lead to some insightful thinking on how things should go. So yeah, I'm sure we can take this forward and create some thought pieces on this as well for the Academy. So a big thanks to everyone and thank you for joining us.